That's right.
How's that? Oh, no, that's the projector.
Are we using the Chinese one?
Right.
If you've got the right wires and the right plugs,
Yeah.
quite easy.
So anyway, I was going to start out by saying that, that I want nobody to mistake for a second that I'm a sky god of some kind. Or
You are.
I am a very ordinary pilot. I've been doing it a long time, to my complete satisfaction. But no stunningly long flights or anything like that. I actually started in '96, which is a very long time ago. As I put on the slide here, I've got about 1150 hours to date, but it took me 15 years to get to 300 hours with family and other commitments. I was averaging about 20 hours a year on a good year. And since then, I've had a bit more time, been able to get a little bit more done, including cross-countries from southern flights. My longest ever flight was 115 kilometres, not from the southern flight, from Liddington down to Littlehampton. All the wings that I have flown are mid or high Bs or low or mid Cs. I'm on a C at the moment. I did step down to a B again before this one, but I'm not doing anything crazy, no two-liners or anything like that. So that's me. What I was going to ask is the audience, who are you? Well, obviously I know a large number of you, but can I just get a feel first of all, who is actually in the room a red ribbon at the moment? Matt? Oh, good. Okay, great.
We have an advanced pilot hiding in the corner as well.
Oh, where's he? Right, see, you're an advanced pilot. Bloody hell. Respect. And of the red ribbons, has anybody done a cross country yet, or left the hill, even just a flop over the back? Well done.
I followed him.
That's great.
That's all we can pick.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, my talk was designed around speaking to people who probably haven't done very much. So those of you in the room who've been around a bit may find some of this a little bit sort of, you know, basic. But
You asking us to leave?
no. But let's carry on. So, what am I going to say? Typical PowerPoint stuff. Tell people what you're going to say, tell them, then tell them what you said. But we'll start with this anyway. So just, I can talk about some general principles, things you need to bear in mind when you think you want to go cross-country. Then I've got some videos of sample flights from the principal SHGC sites. And we'll hopefully have time to run through some of those. And the other thing I will say is just please ask questions if anything comes up that you just want to have padded out straight away, or if there's anything that you think I'm getting wrong, I'd be grateful to hear. So, why go XC? Why do you want to go XC? I mean, you know, it takes you away from the sites you know, all the terrain that's familiar, you're launching and you're landing, and you end up somewhere you've got to get back. There's a lot of inertia there about sort of actually sticking with what you know. It's not an unsensible thing to do. But when you do it, and you red ribbon guys who've just done the first ones, I hope you'll agree, it's just wonderful. The idea of breaking free from where you started, going across the country, just using the thermals and your ability to spot them, use them and get from one to another, and ending up somewhere else. I mean, I just think it's a great thing to do. For me, that's the absolute core of paragliding and what paragliding is all about, as far as I'm concerned. So, we're going to go XC. What's the first thing to do? Planning. And you know, you can rock up to the hill with an idea of the forecast, see how things go, see if you get a climb, and if you get a climb, just push off somewhere and see what happens. You will get a lot more out of it if you start thinking about what you might be able to do and what that involves as far in advance as possible. And I'm sort of normally talking 2 or 3 days when you can start to have a bit more confidence in a weather forecast that's showing you the right conditions for cross-country that suit the southern sites. And you need to be as up-to-date with that as you possibly can, so that come the day which you're focusing on, or which you've made arrangements to be free on, or whatever it is, you've got as much understanding about what's going to happen with the weather in the air, where that might take you, and what you need to do in your route planning about airspace, for example, and the adjustments you might need to make to your flight beyond just doing a straight downwind dash. By and large, the best XC weather that we get off our sites tends to be when wind is in the sort of northern quadrant. So a downwind dash ends up in the sea fairly quickly. So some planning about what that means, and how we are quite constrained with airspace, and you've got to be thinking about that in advance, so that as you're heading off on your flight, and there's a bit of serendipity about it. You may have a plan, but like most plans, they fall apart at the first engagement. You will take a climb out, it'll take you somewhere, you find yourself in a slightly different position, you're getting a different idea of the drift from the wind, and you have to adapt and adjust. But if you're doing that within a framework of a general understanding of what the air's going to be like, what the wind's going to be like, what the obstructions are in terms of airspace, in terms of the sea, it's going to be much more helpful if you've done that level of preparation.
Question for you. When you're looking at the weather, how much importance do you attach to wind speed and direction, and how much to RASP and thermal potential?
Massive.
Massive both.
Massive all. It's. I was going to say this a bit earlier and I forgot. I don't want to try and get into an analysis of how you interpret weather forecasts and such like. That is a big topic. And if we start going into that, we're not going to get into the sort of physical issues around what do I do when I get to the hill. So, weather, good question, but I'm not going to try and answer it other than use all the tools at your disposal. I focus on RASP and on windy, which are my two principal ones, and that will give you a very good understanding of what the aerology is going to be, what the wind speed and direction is going to be at different heights, what level of lift you can expect, and where as the day goes on. And that's all vital about the planning part, because you might expect to be in the air, people that do long distances are in the air for 6, 7, 8 hours. I turn to jelly after about 4, so I'm never really expecting to do more than that, and that's quite exceptional when I do anyway. But you can still think in terms of, if I get away from the site at midday, where am I going to be at 2 o'clock? Where am I going to be at 3 o'clock? And what is RASP telling me? What is windy telling me? What are the soundings telling me about what type of lift is going to be, whether there are dangers, whether it's going to overdevelop, whether the clouds are going to get too strong, what's going to happen to the sea breeze, what impact is that going to have? So it's all part of the planning, but as I say, it is a huge topic, and there's a lot of information out there. I mean, I don't know how many of you look at Greg Hamilton's information, but if you're minded to, I find he is very good at explaining and illustrating these topics in a very understandable form, and they're very useful things to fall back. I certainly keep looking at them from time to time. The bottom line on this: equipment, instruments, sustenance. Make sure everything's there, working, charged. You know how to use them at whatever level you need to. Drink and food is very important. I'm not very good at that, quite frankly. But if you're able to drink and eat, it will keep your brain working better as you start to get tired. Now, quite clearly, if you drink, especially if you drink and you need to stay hydrated, that has a consequence, and you've either got to be able to deal with that or be prepared to allow for nature to take its course. And that's sometimes easier for the boys than the girls. So we're on the hill. We've got ourselves ready, we've launched, and the first thing you're going to need to try and do is to get a decent climb out that's going to put you in a position to head off cross country.
Speak up, please, Pete. It's having a little bit difficulty hearing.
Yeah, sure, sorry about that, thanks Paul. So, obviously you need basic thermaling skills as a minimum, but you're in most cases going to be trying to leave from a fairly crowded or a very crowded site, so you've also got to be able to deal with other pilots, and that's anticipating and cooperating with other pilots on what they're going to be trying to do. A principal difficulty is that on most days there will be a cohort of pilots who are ridge soaring and another cohort who want to thermal and get away. And that can create potential conflicts in terms of direction. Are you conflicting with somebody else's course and all the rest of it? The simplest thing I can say about this is just to try and build a picture of what people are doing and allow time, allow space. And the classic conflict is you fly out from the ridge, you start a thermal, you start your right-hand turn, and halfway through it there's some bugger coming along the ridge going to come straight at you, and he's wondering what on earth you're doing. So there are ways you can avoid that. One, don't turn back at the ridge until you're either a long way above it or a long way out in front of it. Don't expect that you can start a thermal at ridge height and come straight back into the ridge and everybody's going to get out of the way. It is irrespective of what air law and such like says. This is just good sense. We do not want to bump into other people. So give yourself space. Classically, try and fly out as far as you can. Obviously, you need to be able to get back to the ridge if you think that you're losing height and you haven't found the thermal. As you start your turn, obviously lots of observation, but keep an eye out for people who aren't sort of joining the thermal that you're in and are coming from a different direction with a different idea. So that's something we all have to deal with. One way of dealing with it at our sites is actually most of them have got quite a lot of space. I mean, the dike, you've got all the way to Truly, Bo Peep you've got from Firle Beacon to Alfriston. Mount Caban, not quite the same. And there's quite a lot of opportunity for you to find a spot that still regularly produces good thermals, but isn't overcrowded. And I hope I'll be able to show you in some of the flights I've got here where you'll see, I tend to go along towards Truly before I start across country, or I tend to go along to Firle Beacon if I'm at Bo Peep, because it's just, you've got more space most of the time. And then the other thing about the climb out, you're in your thermal, you're climbing up, obviously you're concentrating on maxing your use of the lift and staying in it and adjusting your turn and so on and so forth. And once again, I'm not going to attempt in this talk to talk about how you thermal and things like that. Once again, that's a big topic that needs to be dealt with separately.
We had a talk recently from Ked on that.
Oh yeah.
And, whilst we didn't video that particular one, there is a TED talk on
TED talk, I like that. Great.
on the YouTube channel.
Okay, well so take a look at that, because Ked does very well.
Does everybody, if you're going into, does everybody do it at the same time, like 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, or can you do it any time when the thermals are working?
Okay, so it depends on the conditions, and some people will get away earlier and quicker, but on a typical thermic day, the conditions get better the longer you wait, until actually more than half the day's gone, and that means you're going to run out of time and thermals before you max out the conditions. So it's a toss-up between, if I get going early, I've got to, it is going to be more difficult to stay in the air and make progress until the conditions start to improve, and I don't know. It's too much of a generalism, but by and large, thermals reach their max about 2 in the afternoon. People may have other views on that, but I think it's that sort of order, and depending on the conditions, will keep going till 4:30 and the time of year, and then it starts to die down a bit. If you're the sort of guy that wants to fly for 6 hours, you need to start going perhaps a bit earlier, and especially in the southern flights size, because as we'll come on to in a second, we have an extra little ingredient to add to our degree of difficulty around here, and it's called the sea breeze. And we'll come on to that in a minute. I'm taking a bit too long on this. The final point I'll make here, observation, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the next slide, because what I mean by observation is, don't forget, whilst you're concentrating on your climb, your first thermal, you want to get up to cloud base or as close as possible, try and leave a little bit of bandwidth to keep an eye out for what the clouds are doing in your sort of downwind, crosswind quadrant, so that you can spot the clouds that look like they're developing as you're going up. And the reason for that is, and why I think it's so important, is that when you do get to cloud base, if there's anything more than about 4/8 cloud, and you look along the bottom of the clouds, you just see clouds. You don't see anything different. You just see a layer of cloud, because you can't see up to that bit between them. So that's the sort of observation point that I would make, apart from the usual things about safe flying and all the rest of it, as you're climbing up. So there we are. We're at cloud base. Where's the next thermal? Clouds. We've talked about that. They are a very, very good clue if you've had time to observe their development. Ground sources, once again, ground sources are important, especially when you're lower. Trying to understand the linkage between the ground source and the cloud that may be being fed from it is extremely important and useful. I don't always find it that easy, quite frankly. But then, what are the other things you can look at when you're up in the air to try and think about where's a good place to go? Well, the easiest is other pilots. So if there's somebody else in the air with you, and especially if they're in that cone of direction that you want to go, that can be a really good indication of somewhere that you could be heading to. Even if somebody's on a glide, can you tell whether they're sinking a lot or not sinking at all, or even climbing? And that will give you a very good clue as to where to go and what to do. Other sources, birds and such like, once again, a buzzard is a wonderful source. If you're at cloud base, you're probably less inclined to spot something there, but as you're getting a little bit lower, really important to keep your eyes open for anything that's using a thermal to get up. A buzzard, a paraglider, anything. The other thing I'll say is don't be in too much of a rush. Certainly when I started going cross country, as soon as I got to the top of what I thought my climb was, I was off. I needed to go somewhere. And half the time, I didn't know where I was going. I hadn't found a cloud, I couldn't see anything marking one, I just thought, I'm going that way. And that doesn't always work. In fact, more often than not, it doesn't work. So you want to try and assess from everything that you've got available to analyse where there will be a good place that's going to maximise your chance of finding another thermal. And when you've made that decision, then go for it. And I personally use speed bar even downwind, because I just think if I've made my decision that's where I want to be there as quickly as possible. And then if it doesn't work, well, you have to start thinking about something else. And more often than not, by then you're starting to look at ground sources. But there we are. The other thing in that is that if you get up to the top of your climb, whatever that is, cloud base obviously sets a very firm limit. It's worth, if you haven't decided where the good place is, it's worth just hanging on. If your climb's petered out, you're in zeros, you're in only tiny climb, or even if you're not sinking very fast, and most of the instruments now have this bip bip feature on, which tells you, although you might be going down through the air, you're actually still maintaining your height because the air around you is going up. And it's worth just hanging on and letting, assuming you're heading off downwind, letting the wind just float you along whilst you're circling in nothing until something more definitive presents itself, either a clear opportunity of where to go or the climb matures into something better. And then the final point is, I've put landing options here because somebody once defined across country as going from landing option to landing option. And I do think that's an important point. If you're at 5,000 feet, you don't have to be too precise about this. As you get lower, and without sort of wishing yourself back down on the ground, it's worth keeping a picture of where you could land if you needed to. And that should get more defined the lower you get. Some people say you shouldn't do that, it gives you a sort of defeatist attitude and you'll end up on the ground because you're wishing that. I don't agree with that. I think you need to, it's an essential part of your own safety to not fly yourself into a situation where you run out of options. And as I did that in September, and I'm nearly cured, it's a point that I feel quite strongly. Right, moving on. navigation. So where do you want to go? Well, I mean, in most cases you want to go downwind, but we've got the sea downwind of most northerly winds, so you have to adjust for that. If the conditions are right, and that normally means good thermals but virtually no pressure gradient wind, you could think about a circuit, an out and return or a triangle, and then you've just got to think about, well, what are the best directions to do which might facilitate that. And in most cases, avoid trying to go directly upwind. Triangles, you don't need to do that unless things change a bit. There's always a crosswind option as you make up the points. Allowance for airspace, that's once again really important. Start thinking about that earlier rather than later. You want to crab your way across and around airspace obstructions and don't find yourself bang up against one horizontally rather than just vertically, because you can take steps to stop going up into airspace, but if you've got some airspace that's blocking your way, it could be an ATZ or it could be some other form of restriction, make allowance for that in good time so you can get round it or possibly over it safely. And then finally here I've just put the sea breeze front. Once again, I don't want to go into too much detail. Learn to recognise what a sea breeze front looks like and understand what that is going to do to the air and the wind, and allow for it in your flying. Now sea breeze fronts can be really good sources of lift, and you can cruise along a sea breeze front without turning in a fairly narrow band and make a lot of distance. But they vary, they bulge in, they drop back. It can be turbulence, and if you go through the sea breeze front, it's not a disaster, but it can be a bit bumpy as it happens, and sometimes it's a bit difficult because of the shape of them. It's like a wedge going up against the pressure gradient wind. Sometimes because of the shape of them, it's a bit difficult to get back the right side, rather. Gaggle flying. By far, the best way of making distance is to fly in the company of other people, and you all help each other find the lift and find the best lift. There's a reason why competitions are characterised by huge gaggles of competition pilots all staying together, trying not to be the first one that bolts off, because then you're taking a risk, because you're leaving the gaggle. If you've got a group of people, whether you know them or not, you can see whether you're flying sort of smoothly together. An ideal size 3, 4 or 5, but 2, and I've got a slide of just 2 of us a bit later if we have time. It really helps. Cooperate, what I put here is let the scouts back in. It's quite useful if things are petering out. If somebody feels a bit of pressure in the glider and takes off in a slightly different direction, you might find, oh, the better core over here, and then you can all move across. And if he doesn't, or she doesn't, comes back in, make room. Don't just sort of keep firmly on your trajectory if you can see somebody's trying to join you thermal at that point. And so the gaggle efficiency then works, and it is a good way of making distance. Robin, how am I doing on time here?
We're good.
Okay.
So what do you think is a good point to make?
Yeah, good. And then we come back and look at the videos first. Yeah, okay. So, speed. There's only so many hours in the day from a thermal point of view. Depending on your own resilience, there's only so many hours in a day when you can function flying a paraglider. For me, that's the biggest issue. So sometimes it's quite good to speed up if you want to make distance, but you do need to gauge the conditions. And you'll know when it starts to get good. You extra buoyancy, it's easy to find climbs, so you can just go a bit faster. But do be ready to slow down if it suddenly starts to get tricky. Once again, on the videos, there's a couple of examples where suddenly it got easy. And I'm flying along between 4,000 and 2,500 feet, and getting the climbs at 2,500 feet back up again, so I could just push on with confidence. The corollary of that is if you're going to go cross country, you've got to stay in the air. So think strategically, think tactically about what you think the air is doing and how it's changing and how it might change at different levels. That's a very difficult picture to build up. It's easy to look afterwards when you might be analysing the flights you did before. But once again, if you're in doubt about what to do next and you're in zeros or very, very gentle lift or even minor sink, just stay there and let the wind do the work for you until you've got a better idea about where to go. And then just finally, it's cross country in my mind is not a race. It's about optimising the day's conditions, and people like to achieve distance, but it's good just to stay in the sky and enjoy your flying as well. Whoops. End of the flight. There comes a time when either you need to land, you've had enough, or you're just running out of lift and you've got to a point you think, yeah, I'm heading for the ground here. So by then, hopefully you have in mind a couple of possible landing sites, your prime one and an alternative if for whatever reason that doesn't work. To the extent you haven't already been doing this, now you really have to focus about hazards. And obviously power lines are the major ones and often the least visible. So just learn to think if there's a house in the middle of nowhere, it's going to have a power line. And sometimes the easiest things to identify are the posts or the shadows from the posts. And they might show up before you can actually see the lines, which are harder to identify. And just have a mind for that, because that's so important. Not as important, but things that can make your life easier. If you've got an option, try and land near a road. You might get some transport. You might hitch a lift or get a bus. I also have a strong desire always to land near a pub. I'm thinking about trying to put some flesh on the bones of an alternative XC competition that will have the venue you then choose to stop for a drink and a meal as an important part of the scoring process. And the proximity to which you land to it gives you bonus points, and if you have to walk 5 miles to get to it, you have negative points. Even if you've flown past it. Anyway, that's for another day.
Last one there pays for the meal, yeah?
I beg your pardon?
Last one there pays for the meal.
Well, you can't necessarily, because we might not end up at the same pub. And so the scoring here is going to be very subjective, but it's going to be focused on the quality of the meal, not the price. So if you go somewhere and you get baked beans on toast as opposed to a 3-course smash-up meal with steak and things, that's going to score more. We're not going to try and equalise costings though. Right, finally, retrieve. You're down, now you've got to get home. Telegram groups, I'm sure you all know about them. Use them, they are absolutely wonderful. And it's amazing how helpful people can be. Public transport, there are buses around. Once you get deep into the country, it's a bit more difficult. Or hitching. Obviously, there are certain risks attached to that, but speaking personally, I've never had a problem. But you have to make your choice. Right. Oh, goodness me, what happened there? Right. So those are my sort of general principles. Happy to take any questions that you might have saved up, or if there's anything along that you'd like me to try and explore a bit more.
I've got a question like that. So, say taking off from Devil's Dyke,
Yeah.
you can't go south far without needing your swimming trunks.
Yep.
And you can't go that far north, obviously, because that's where the wind is coming from and there's airspace. So you're going to go east or west, so probably east towards St. Louis direction.
Yep.
But of course the wind is wanting to shove you south all the time, so you can't really do the sort of, I'll just stay with the thermal that will take me in the right direction because it will take me to the beach. What's the way around that? What's your approach for dealing with that?
Well, we'll see when we look at the videos where some of the ones I've got where there's a strong north wind component going from both the Dyke and Bo Peep, and you have to allow for it. It's how far off course, if I can put it that, are you being pushed? What does it mean if you stay in the air and drift a little bit further in, quote, the wrong direction, as opposed to, I'm out of here, I'm going to crosswind and see if I can find something. There is no right or wrong answer. It's an assessment of the situation that you find yourself in. And there is one flight I've done where I, going east but being swept south a lot, I actually chose to cross the Ouse Valley at a wide point of the Ouse Valley, whereas normally I'd let myself drift down to Rodman and go across to the sort of Ipford Hill, Firle Ridge and something like that, because I just felt I don't want to get that far south. I can't remember indeed. I felt I might get swallowed up by the sea breeze, and so there's another one where I did cross at the narrow bit because I was happy to let myself go that far south.
Okay, thank you.
You talked earlier about northerly winds being more favourable for at-sea flying. I've never really thought about the answer to this before, but is that because you've got polar air masses with colder air coming in and therefore a better temperature differential promoting thermals than if the wind's a tropical air mass coming from the south?
It's air masses and pressure. So your classic good cross-country day in the South Downs is a post-frontal northwesterly. So you've got clear air, it's a polar air mass, so it's not full of moisture from the sea or dust from the continent or something like that. And I'm sure you've all noticed after a rain front goes through how bright things can be the next morning. So that's one thing. Two, you've got the temperature differential in that because it is a colder air mass, and it tends to be, the pressure tends to be on the lower side rather than the higher side, and that's more conducive to instability, which is what we need if thermals are going to form. And then there's variance to that. I think Mount Caban, which we'll talk about with the videos, Mount Caban is very different because what I said about, the thermals get better as you wait later in the day does not necessarily apply to Mount Caban. Mount Caban has a sort of strange characteristic in that if you've got a a southwesterly pressure gradient wind. So it is coming off the sea, but it's not a sea breeze as such. But it's moist, it's cool, and you might be on Mount Cavan and you can see lots of good things happening a bit inland, but it's still, you're scrabbling around and scratching and not getting anywhere. And then you can get that flow accelerated a little bit by a sea breeze building up behind it, and you get a release. Oof, and it's the magic thermal from Mount Cavan. And some days you only get one, and that you have to be in it. Otherwise you just stay at Mount Cavan. And the trick with Mount Cavan in most cases is get up. Most of the time you don't get up very far, you hang on like grim death, and you want to get as far inland as you possibly can and as far away from the effect of the sea, whether it's a sea breeze or not, into drier, more unstable thermic conditions.
Pete, do you have a preference of flying by yourself or with a gaggle, depending on who they are? Do you like making your own decisions, or are you quite happy to kind of go with the flow?
Oh, I'm very happy to go with the flow, but I often end up flying by myself. I don't know why that is, but no, a lot of my cross-countries have started out with other people, but then the gaggles do tend to break and people go at different speeds. And strangely enough, most of the ones I've done from Bo Peep, I end up by myself. I've gaggle flown to Ashford from Mount Cavan and from Devil's Dyke a few times, and that's been really useful. It's just whatever it is. It's quite nice being out there on your own, actually. You know, it's just you and what you can make of the conditions and all the rest of it. But then it's also nice when there's somebody the other side of the thermal showing you that the lift is better over there and you can both move over and you both win, sort of thing.
It's nice not to worry about bumping into other people, though.
Oh, absolutely. But you know, in the context of a small gaggle on a cross country, yeah, obviously you have to be aware of each other and what you're doing, but it's not like the sort of less organised mayhem you sometimes get on a crowded
still
site.
when you trust them, you need people you know that you trust.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's great.
Yeah.
I was going to say about Cavan, doing cross countries from Cavan, I always feel a bit nervous about it, because I know that when you start heading north, the airspace starts getting lower and more complicated, and it's something that's never appealed to me. The only thing I want to do from Mount Cavan is fly home, which is south, which is really tricky.
Yes, yeah. I like Mount Cavan. I think you can get some really interesting flights from it. For me, far too many of them end round about Heathfield. I don't understand what it is about the land there. I have one or two theories, but they're not worth talking about.
Thank you.
Can I ask about, like you said about choosing a landing
Yeah.
site? Do you normally do you land in places that you know because you've been there before, or do you land just randomly somewhere you've never seen before and you just judge it as that's a good field to land in?
More often it's random, to use your word, than you know. I mean, Ashford, normally by the time I've got to Ashford, I've had enough. And there's a very, very nice landing field just near the factory outlet building, which is a very clear landmark. It's a walk from the station or a short bus ride, and lots of space, etc., etc. But otherwise, in most cases, I don't want to land, and so you keep on pressing, and you're watching and think, oh, right, okay, well that's my field, and then you get a bit of a lift and you go on and readjust that field. I've got my eye on that field if I need it, and you keep on going and so on. But you've got to do that. Always be checking that it's a safe place to land, that the aspect of it is right, that your entry into the field looks sensible, and don't, you know, go back to the one that you knew was safe, if you still can, rather than press on hoping for the best, so to speak.
I've got another question, if I may, please, Pete.
Yeah, Paul.
Regarding judging distance over time, sort of thing, when you were talking about the planning, like for instance, your 115k cross country, how long did that take you? What's your rule of thumb for the planning part of, oh, I can travel maybe 25 kilometres in an hour or something like that?
Well, I mean, you push your finger on it. By and large, 25 kilometres an hour is a sort of standard rate of progress, which allows for a mix of climbing and gliding. Obviously, if you've got a stronger wind blowing you along, so long as the thermals are still good, you'll go quicker. Obviously also, if you've got less wind or the air is a bit stable and you're spending much more time just staying in the air rather than gliding, it's going to be a lot slower. And I've got two trips to Ashford on the videos, one that took 3 hours in terms of, that's the cross-country time, and one that took just over 2. And that's just because the conditions were better.
I think Emily had a
I was
question.
just interested in your rules of thumb, sort of like when you're gauging the day, sort of, these things are going to affect, okay, today it feels like it's going to take me maybe 20 kilometres an hour, and today it's going to be like 30 kilometres an hour. Or
Yeah, well, I mean, I tend to sort of look at 25, but then if the wind's stronger, you might add a bit on, or if the wind's not so strong, take a bit off. But also, you know, the most important thing is that whatever's going to happen, it's not going to be what you calculated. And so you've got to work with what you get, but it's giving you a good idea. You know, in 2 hours' time, I should. Yeah,
it's just a rule of thumb. It's a guideline.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's sort of, you know, you deviate from that. I spent the best part of an hour and a half travelling 25 kilometres. You know, more than actually going from Devil's Dyke to home.
Well, that's probably very rewarding.
Well, it was very rewarding.
Yeah.
But I did get stuck in the sea breeze though for about 45 minutes and couldn't get down. But, you know.
There we go. Okay.
I think there's a question from Emily.
Yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just butting in. Have you found yourself in many positions where you, let's say, annoyed a property owner or pissed someone off, basically? Because my biggest worry is landing somewhere where I'm going to get in trouble with someone, it's private property, or I can't, if there's a fence and I can't get out. That's my biggest worry when I'm flying cross country.
You can land anywhere in an emergency, and in flying a glider, your landings are always going to be an emergency because you've got no choice.
So as long as
Yeah,
I use the word
that's an argument, but that doesn't necessarily defuse a cross landowner. The answer to that is twice, which is not many times. And the first time I learnt an awful lot, where I landed somewhere near Peacehaven actually, and I landed in this field. I had been looking to go to a field that didn't have stock in, this did, but it wasn't lambing time or anything like that. And at the last minute, I'm ashamed to say, I just saw some power lines that were stopping me getting to the field that I'd selected. So I had to put myself down in this other field that had stock. And this guy drove out in his Jeep, and I knew straight away there's an issue here. But I'd taken my harness off, I'd put my gear here and this, that and the other. Everything's all spread out. And the guy, he was very aggressive. And I tried to explain, and this, you know, he wasn't having any of it. So he started picking up my kit. So then, okay, you know, I'm not a fighting person, but even if I was, you know, if I chin him, then I'm in the wrong in a big way. When I'm not in the wrong, just in standing in his field. And so we had to sort that one out, and you know, and in the end I gave him some money. It's a shameful thing to have to admit, but I just thought, you know, and I told him I'm coming back with a policeman and a solicitor, and he thought, you know, anyway, so, and the other time was when somebody just got snotty and said, so you set out to trespass every time we fly? Come on, dear, you know, but it happens. But by and large, a big smile, a clear awareness of that you have concerns to make sure you don't damage their land. You know, obviously, try your very hardest not to land where there's stock. Don't land where there's fields in crop. Give horses a very wide berth. And if you can demonstrate that you have all that understanding when somebody comes and challenges you, and you just be polite and relaxed. And, you know, I once landed somewhere, Mark Watts came by to pick me up, and this guy turned up and got quite aggressive. And Mark diffused him brilliantly, not the way I would have chosen him. He gave this guy a talking to about the Enclosures Act and how that had stolen land from the people of England. And he's got a bloody nerve to come and talk to us. But I'm thinking, bloody hell, I'll try and write this down, you know. But you also need to be Mark Watts if we're going to deliver it in the right way.
What did you call it? The enclosure what?
The Enclosures Act.
Oh.
I'm going to Google that.
Sorry?
I'm going to Google that.
I think most people are genuinely interested in what you're doing, aren't they? They come over to you and
Yeah.
chat with you,
Yeah.
sometimes there's kids around, and
Yeah.
like I say, it's communication
Yeah.
skills. And
Yeah, and if they've got kids with them, that's easy as pie.
exactly.
Yeah, do you want to hold the wing? Do you want to do this? Yeah. Right. So,
On your phone, if you put the BHPA app, there's a copy of the BHPA insurance. And that might be useful to be able to show someone, look, I've got insurance, I'm sorry I damaged your cow, tractor, or whatever. The other thing is, it applies more places like India. Carry a bag of sweets. And if kids emerge, dish out the sweets and they'll pack up your glider for you.
but keep all your valuables attached to you. Sorry.
So we get time to break for 10 minutes.
Cool.
We'll come back at 5 past.
Okay. Got a few videos. Now, I'm going to start with Mount Caven. And this is a flight, I can't remember when I did it, to Ashford. Now this is me just getting it ready. I'm not doing anything now. Look, my hands are in the air. Oh, look. There we are. Oh, what's happened here? That's all right. It started all by itself. It's not supposed to have done that. Never mind. Let's carry on. So, it's worth, if you can see it, if we can get some focus, that would be very helpful. That bottom bar is quite important. Is that the best we can do? That's all we can do. That's all we can do. Okay, right. So, there...
Probably because it's on the tilt.
The edges are important.
Let me just stop that for a second. So, this is quite unusual in that I took off and went straight up at Mount Caven. So I must have taken off just at the moment when the magic thermal came through. If you can see the bar along the bottom, so it's really indistinct, you've got a line with the odd spike in it, which is basically my height, which is the red line, and then you've got the blue line, which is my ground speed. Now, when I'm climbing, that line goes up and down, up and down, up and down very quickly, because obviously I'm going around in circles, and so my speed in relation to the ground, because of the wind, changes quite considerably. I'll point a few things out as we go through this to sort of demonstrate how things have worked. You'll see it a little bit better when I start this up again. So, yeah, an immediate climb out from Mount Caven up to about 2,300 feet, and what we're seeing now is just zeros scratching, no climbing, and you can see if you see the bar going along the bottom. So that's where I am on the flight. Now I'm climbing again, and gradually getting, as I get further inland, better climbs. I'm about this next climb takes me up to about £4,000, the one that's just about to start. But I haven't gone on a glide yet. I've been circling the entire time here, and that is very typical of Mount Caburn. You've just got to hang on in there. And I'm sorry the definition here is not much good, so we're sort of getting to about Hailsham, I think, now. And I'm now on my first glide.
So is that just the thermal drift?
The first bit was just a thermal drift. Yeah. I did a little bit of a glide back after the sort of first peak, but just hanging on. And then, I'm just going to go back.
So you landed.
Yeah. So, I hit the most amazing sink at this point. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So a little bit south of Heathfield, a bit south and east, and everything's been going fine. There are other people in the air around me, a couple of 100 feet higher, and I suddenly went whoomph. And from this point, if you can see that, let me start it up again. You might see it a bit better. See that downward slope that we're going down now on the bottom bar? It was 5 to 6 down at times. Unbelievable. And you know, the conventional wisdom is do something very different, you know, change direction 90 degrees or something like that. But that bit of land around there is quite wooded. And I felt myself, I was being guided down this valley because that was the place with the landing options. And once you get below a certain height, you think, well, I could go over that wood, but I'm not too sure I'm going to make it. So I ended up sticking to this horrendous sink, and it took me to within, I reckon, I was about 150 feet above the ground. I think I had one of my feet out the pod. I had selected my landing field, and then there was a bubble. And then, if we carry on, and once again, if you watch that bar at the bottom, it wasn't exactly a strong climb. You see the bar going along, it's just inching, and now it's starting to get going a bit. And I'm just turning, you can tell by the jaggedy blue line, which is the ground speed, just clinging. And then suddenly, it all starts to get a bit better. Woomph. And why this happens, I don't know. But that was a classic low save, and we're just on our way up to about, 1,200 metres, I can never remember. Yeah, 4,000 feet again. And if you then look at the red line and the blue line, suddenly everything is easy. It's buoyant. I do the rest of the flight between about 4,500 feet and 2,300 feet. And it happens that the air gets better the higher you are. And if you can start to notice this, and it's a very difficult thing to do because it's easy to do it when you're looking at a sort of post-facto analysis like this. You say, actually, staying above 2,500 feet is what you need to do. But that's where the good climbs are. But if you just stay in sync, it's not going to happen, is it? But there's a lot to be said for if you're getting low, thinking hard about doing something different to try and find a climb, to stay in that band, that higher band.
What time of year was this?
Oh, good question. This was July. Yeah. So it's a good time of year. So I don't know if there's much else that this is going to show us, this particular one now. It just goes on like that. We get to Ashford. I take the decision I'm going to land. So in fact, I think I started spiralling at about £2,000 or something like that, and went down to the landing side. So I'll stop this now because I don't think there are any more learning points on that. But any questions on what you've seen?
So when you do decide to come down, what is your main technique? If the air's very, very buoyant, like it is the second half of the flight, what is your main technique to get down if you wanted to?
Gentle spiral. Yeah. I've been on 4 or 5 SIVs. The last couple, and they were sort of 5-6 years apart. I spent quite a long time on spirals because it's very good to find the points you need to avoid in terms of your handling and what you can do to get out of a mess. But having a good spiral in your toolbox is something that you are more likely going to need to use from time to time than, auto rotation, which is a joy. Have you done an SIV yet? No, well, you have that pleasure to come. And
Yeah, just out of interest, so on that particular flight, were there any airspace considerations?
no, I've got some airspace maps with me, and I think it's really useful to get hold of paper copies, the plasticky paper copies of airspace, because that, for me, is by far the best way of getting the picture of where airspace is and what you need to avoid. Now, I'm pretty familiar with all of this bit here, and I know that if you go north of Heathfield you hit 3,500 very quickly, and actually that stays in quite a long line sort of going up to the northeast, and you've got a close point near the radio mast at Cross in Hand where you can end up in 2,500 very quickly as well. And going the other way, you have to be careful not to go too far north because you start to run out of the 4,500, and there's a funny little bit where suddenly it goes down to 5,000, whereas most of the other sky around here is 5,500. I had a thought that was in my mind, it's just gone. Never mind, it'll probably come back, but it is, you can look at your instruments, but I still think the best way of building up the picture of the airspace is to buy yourself an airspace map, and if you're just thinking of flying locally to start with, the 1 to 250,000 is, you get more definition on it, but it doesn't show you what the higher airspace issues are, which shouldn't worry us normally, but the 1 to 500,000 is the sort of definitive one.
Can I ask, would you have planned to, were you hoping to go to Ashford, like the day before? Had you got a route in your head that this is where I'm going to go if it works?
I'll be honest, yes and no. You could tell it was going to be a good day, because of the weather, because of the rasp lift and things like that. So I set out with Ashford in mind, but without an expectation, if you see what I mean, which I suppose is what I do every time. But definitely that's what I thought. Let's go to Ashford. We're always talking to each other on the hill. Well, let's go to Ashford. Yeah, But actually, on this occasion, I think about 6 or 7 of us landed there. So it was quite a nice little fly.
Did you put
really.
one as a waypoint or anything like that?
I'm too bloody lazy. I mean, I did, the first time I went to Ashford, I'd actually declared it, so I got more, you know,
Yeah. More points.
Tesco points. But no, I should do. Right. Okay, so let's stop this one now, unless there's any more questions. And we'll move on to another Mount Caban one, which is, guess what? Going to Ashford. And this one's very different. Sorry, whilst we go through this business for a second or two. Okay, good. So let's have a look. Watch this bar along the bottom if you can see it. Not a lot is happening here. I think it took nearly 30 minutes before I got the first climb. So what we're seeing here, and I'm sorry I don't have a way in which I can speed this up. And now we're just about to get this to lift off. So, at last, we're starting to climb. First climb took me to about 2,150, which we're just coming up to, and then I thought that's good enough. I'll go on a glide. Now that's a bit low, but I can't remember what the reasons were. There were quite a few of us in the air, so maybe there was somebody ahead and I'd seen them and thought, okay, let's go for that. But sometimes that would be a little bit dangerous to go scooting off unless you've got something definite to go for. But there were quite a lot of us flying that day. And then very quickly after that, climbed up to whatever that was, 900 metres, 3,000 feet. And then this sort of became another one of those days when once you're up, you can stay up. So you see that red line once again? It's really not going below the point we're just coming to now. That's about 500 metres, which translated at, well, it's quite low, 1,650 feet. It wasn't a mega day in terms of height of climb. I don't think we ever went above 3,000 feet. But, oh, that's right, cloud base was 3,000 feet. I remember now. But there's a lesson coming up in this. Sorry, it's a little bit further along. But you can see climbing and gliding, and you can see where the glides are. One, because I tend to go down, and two, because you don't get that jaggedy ground speed line. If you go along to the right, you can see there's another low point. And this is sometimes the danger of gaggle flying. It wasn't so much a gaggle, but Andrew Kay and Hugh Miller were in the air. Now they were a climb and most of a glide ahead of me at that stage. And I'd taken this climb up to, I think it was my highest point of the day at that stage, which was it's only about 1,000 metres, so 3,000 feet. And they'd completed the glide across to the next cloud street to the south, which did look better. So I thought, well, I'm virtually at cloud base, I'll just scoot across and join that. And as you can see, I got some pretty bad sink once or twice. And then I ended up seriously scrabbling. And clawed my way out of it as sort of going up here and then back up to about 3,000 feet again. Ignore that, that's me doing something whilst I was recording this. But But in that climb that I sort of left before the top, there's a chap called Ashley who does quite a lot of good cross countries, and he was a bit below me. When I got back up out of this, he was so far ahead of me because he hadn't bothered to do this deviant experiment with a different cloud street. So unless there's a very positive reason, if you're in a good climb and it looks sensible ahead, whatever anybody else is doing, it's sometimes better to stick with what you've got than others. Okay, any sort of questions, comments on that?
So was that your wing performance that didn't keep up with the other two then?
No, that's a shit flying.
Very honest.
Is it possible to put the airspace restrictions up on this map? Or is that not
I can't do that with this, no. Like I said, this is I used this because it was the only way in which I could show the track of the entire flight from the same perspective in one go. I felt that was more valuable. But I can tell you we're comfortably in the 5-5 area, where we get back to, I mean, this is quite a southerly route, so, no, I got quite close to Heathfield actually, down the bottom left corner. But Heathfield is so obvious, and you've got the radio mast there that's so obvious that you don't have to wait for your airspace alarm to start singing at you. You know you're at the boundary and you mustn't go over it.
There's a few other airfields in and around, isn't there? There's Headcorn and Lyd, I think Lyd's on the coast.
Yes, I mean Headcorn's got an ATZ around it. But that's further, that's beyond Ashford. It's on that line that goes up towards the sort of northeast. And that's and you've got, as I said, the airspace drops down to 3,500 feet, I think, there.
Oh, so you've got a way to go before you get to Headcorn?
Yeah. And Lyd, I don't think that has an ATZ, it's just an ordinary airfield. There's a couple of funny little ones. There's deep... I'm sorry?
I think Lyd has something.
Oh well, I'll be corrected. I'm quite happy.
Well, I've just flown in and out of it in fixed wing a couple of times.
Yeah. Oh, we can. I've got the airspace map with me. We can have a look.
Yeah.
But not now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what I'm trying to do here is I'll just close that actually. Is sort of talk, that first climb from Mount Caban is the first flight I showed was just too easy. I stepped off the edge of the hill and went up. The second one it was about 30 minutes of hard graft with lots of other people flying around before latched onto the climb. And as I said, I reckon there were about a dozen of us in that climb, or in or about it at that stage, and I don't know if other people got away that day. It's a funny place.
How far was that then from Mount Caban to there?
That's 68 kilometres.
Okay.
So I mean, I feel pleased when I've done 68 kilometres. I've got another one which I'll just quickly look at and try and remember why I wanted to show this one. Oh, sorry, we have to go through all this nonsense. I think once again, it's if you can look at the bottom thing, you just sometimes have to take your time and wait for things to happen at Mount Caban. And then when it does, the climb on that one, which we're coming up to, that went up to 2,000 feet. So, and virtually the entire cross country. I mean, the highest I got was 700 metres, so 2,300 feet. And I think once again there was a very, very low cloud base. And it was a sort of day when you really don't think you're going to go cross country. But having got up there, I thought, well, let's give this a go. And it stayed buoyant enough until I got to that strange area just to the south-southeast of Heathfield and ended up on the ground.
This is something you can observe from on the ground on the hill.
Mm.
You see lots of gliders in the air, not really going anywhere. Suddenly, 8 or 10 of them are getting height, and 3 minutes later they're all gone.
It's really not fair sometimes.
I say that from on the ground.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think there's any more learning points in this one, quite frankly. So, unless there's any questions, comments, I'll close this one down and we'll have a look at something from the dike. Now, which was the one I was going to do first? Now, unfortunately, the flights I'm proudest of from the dike, I couldn't get onto this format. But then it's not about me, it's about learning points for everybody else. So we'll see what happens here. Oh, look, I've climbed straight out again. This is unusual. Once again, the most informative bit of this is looking at the bar going across the table at the bottom. That's 3,000 feet we're just getting to. That is pretty good going for an early stage in a climb. Oh no, we're not in Mount Caden, we're at the dike, excuse me. Remember where we are. Okay. Reset. So, learning point here is we've got quite a strong northwesterly wind. So the question that was asked earlier, you can see that I'm being set down to the southeast in every climb that we go on. But there's another issue here, and that is I'm getting quite close to airspace. And I think I get up to about 3.6, 3.7 at this stage. And the airspace in front of the dike is quite funny. If you push forwards from the dike, you very quickly get to the 4,500. That then cuts back inland, and the edge of the 4,500 airspace is, in simplistic terms, Falmouth Stadium and then along the A27 to Lewes. So if you've got quite a buoyant day, you need to be careful of that. And part of my reason here for going this far south was because I was getting climbs up to, well, I got 5 grand at one stage, not this early in the flight. And I just wanted to be able to use those climbs without being worried about the airspace. And got a bit low there. Yeah, crossing the Ouse Valley. I've taken I'm south of Lewes, but I'm over the Ouse Valley, and it's quite wide there, and it can be wet, it can be, featureless, not much comes out of it. But I would have done that because, I'm just going to stop this and try and illustrate, because I think that's one of the more useful things about this particular. Okay, so here we are, just south of Lewis, but with quite a lot of height. Yeah, 4.6. So, you know, I'm out of the airspace, but I've got good height, and I do remember that there are other people in the air here. So I just thought, I'm just going to go straight across here. I've got enough height to get across the valley and then pick up, you know, the thermal sources around Mount Caburn and into the Glide Reach and places like that, which is why I just carried on, even though the glide there took me down to about 1,200 feet. Okay, I don't think there's anything much more to talk about on this one.
So can I just ask, so when you were going up the thermals, you were just going around in circles and going back a bit southeasty, I suppose, with the wind.
Yeah.
And when you were gliding rather than thermaling, were you sort of pointing a bit further north, I suppose?
Yes.
And then
Oh, absolutely.
making up for it.
Yes, absolutely. So you see the track, you can see the climbs that are going almost dead towards the southeast, and then the track that's going sort of flat, almost due east, depending on the orientation of this map.
Yeah.
Now, to do that, my heading was probably about 10 or 15 degrees north of that, but my course made good, allowing for that fact I'm being blown by the wind, is such that I'm now going due east. And you just need to be aware of that. The difference between heading and course made good is that where is it you want to go to? And in this case, I wanted to follow the A27. So that's a very easy landmark to look at. So you don't just point straight along the A27, because then you're going to disappear off down to the south. So you aim off, and you aim off enough to just, you know, visually keep.
But that was also your
Exactly.
strategy.
Exactly. And I do fly with quite a big compass, because I've had a few less than pleasing experiences in cloud and where I tried to use electronic instruments to maintain my direction, and you just don't have the time to press the screens and things like that. And so an old-fashioned dinghy racing compass sitting on the flight deck, straight away you can take a bearing and say, that's what I need to keep doing to get to the edge, and there we are. But right, okay.
I just wondered if you were trying to keep away from the sea breeze, because it tends to come up the Ouse Valley or any other river valley.
Yeah.
It pushes in at the valleys rather than...
Good point, Alison. I can't remember, but that is definitely a very good point. And the sea breeze can be a very useful thing, but the one thing that it will certainly do is, as it runs in, probably underneath you if you're high, is it will kill off any thermal development in the land behind the sea breeze front, because you've got cold air, and that just kills stone dead any of the heating effect in the fields that it's now gone over. Having first of all triggered off the thermals from the hot air. The sea breeze is a cold front. It comes chiselling in, and if there's hot air here, as it chisels into that hot air, which is why flying along the sea breeze front can be very rewarding if you get it right. But it does, you know, it needs to be treated with caution, and taught to qualified instructors rather than me to learn about it. Okay. That was, I think, the main learning point that I wanted to show. The set-off of the wind, crossing the Ouse Valley quite high up. And then where did I end up with this one? Oh, Heathfield again. Needless to say. All right, which one am I on? Oh, come on. Anyway, let's move on. Right. I want to find. Oh no, that was the one that took me to Broad Oak near Rye. So it was a south route. And here's something a little bit further north. Once again, huge offset from the wind. Oh, and the other point is on this that took a little bit of time, as you can see, still struggling to get a climb. And this puts into action what I said earlier about just finding yourself somewhere more quiet to go and get lift. So I've moved away from the dike bowl, and I'm probably over the power lines at this stage, and I have no idea why, but power lines do sometimes seem to trigger off thermals. And certainly I've noticed that, you know, about a third of the way along to Truly, and you're hanging around and suddenly ping. I can't explain what the physics is around that though. So here, once again, very strong wind. I've decided to push hard to get in front of the downs. So I'm sort of going over New Timber Hill. No, I'm going over Jack and Jill at this point, almost. And once again, I think there were quite a lot of other people in the air that helped me make my decisions about where I'm going to go. But the overall strategy was to stay north of the downs, and that's more or less what I did. I mean, you don't know if you can see on how far south of my line is Lewis. So I'm well out in the flats in front of the downs at that point. Oh, tell us.
To wrap up about 10. So
how are we doing?
We've got about 10 minutes.
Right, okay, I'm going to stop this then. Thank you. I don't think there's any other particular learning points about that one. I just want to show you this. Hopefully I can freeze this whilst. Right, I've managed it. Okay, so this is the other thing about cross country, from my point of view. Taken off from the dike, I started at Truly on this one, a northerly sort of thing, whittle my way across the countryside, and the wind's been setting me south, and basically I'm heading for Polegate, Eastbourne, Pevensey levels, and I've taken my last climb here from Firle Beacon, and I get to a point and think, actually, I don't know if I want to scrabble around over these built-up areas, or end up in the Pevensey levels, the wrong side of a ditch that I can't find a way of getting over. So I'm going to turn right round and go and fly to Berwick Station, where there is a train and a pub. You're right. So for me, that's an integral part of it. You know, that's all part of the play. The fact that I maybe did 10 kilometres less than I might have done is not an issue, as opposed to having a nice flight, ending up somewhere pleasant, pieing a pint in the pub, and the train all the way back to Brighton to go and find my car. Right. Bo Peep. Oh, no, once again, I'm just going to try and do this very quickly. Try to freeze it again. Okay. Devil's Dyke out and return. Very strong north wind. Got to a point where, so that turning point, that's senior moment. What's the name of the lake in front of Bo Peep? Alceston? Arlington, thank you. So the turn point was Arlington Lake, and I thought, I've had enough of this. It's very cold apart from anything else. Let's see if I can get back to the dike. And the point I wanted to make about this, I'm working my way back along the front of the downs, but going east. And I don't know if you can see sort of the last big climb on the chart there, the last big V up into the air, and you can see this climb. I'm being set off slightly to the southwest, in fact. I was crossing the Ouse Valley quite low, and there is what I call a pimple in the Ouse Valley, about sort of halfway. No, it's if you sort of run off the edge of the downs at Beddingham, it's a bit to the north, but the other side of the river, and it's the only feature in the valley there. And I have had very good climbs off that. It's ridiculous, but it's just worth knowing. If you find yourself, if the wind and the climbs have set you in that direction, it's worth having a look if you're there and you need a climb. And that took me up to wherever the hell.
Is that pimple between Beddingham and Lewis?
Yes, but it's on the west side of the river.
Ah, is that near Swanborough?
No, Swanborough's, you're up on the downs, the other side of the village there. So it's right in the middle of the levels. Right, I am badly running out of time. I apologise for this. Bo Peep. What I'll say about Bo Peep is my flights from Bo Peep have all worked well when I've basically used Firle Beacon as my trigger point, sometimes for the first climb, sometimes to get back to and climb out, and that's really worked well. And after that I will normally try to cross the valley to get to the edge of Caburn and or over the golf course and get north and go north of the downs, and that has tended to work better. There have been exceptions, but that's, I think, all I'm going to say about Bo Peep. I like cross countries from Bo Peep. I've been to Pulborough twice. The last time I deviated, thought I've had enough of this. There's a station and a pub, and I got to Pulborough and there was no trains. Mark Rudenstein came out, and actually the day was coming off, and a few of us landed round there, so it wasn't too much. I'm going to finish with this, because we wanted to talk about gaggle flying. Now this is of a different quality, because my son got involved with helping record this. So it is Mount Caburn again. And I just wanted to use this as a very visual example of how it helps when there's more than one of you in a thermal. And I'll try and stop this at appropriate places. But we're just swanning around. We are flying quite consciously to stay in touch with each other. My home's about 12 kilometres almost due north, and Guy was down for the weekend. And we said, because it was a very southerly wind day, said, come on, let's go down there and let's fly home for lunch, which is a bit of an arrogant thing to assume. But anyway, let's give it a go. And so after a bit of fiddle-farting around, we go, and we got a good climb. Now that's a false one. Petered out, and I came back. And we went, and any second now, oh, what's that? Ping. Now remember, this isn't 32 times speed, so it didn't actually happen like that. Now, okay, we're going up pretty much in tandem, more or less at the same height, and then I think I got a little bit higher, and the climb started to peter out. I felt in my wing an interesting little pull, to the east, so I went off that way. Guy stayed, he's the orange line, he stayed in the thermal. He hadn't fallen, what had happened is I'd fallen out of the right-hand edge of it in reality. He stayed in it, I go for my little exploration, oh it's not really working, Guy stayed in the thermal, I get back there. Damn quick, woomph. And so we're back together again and going. Now, if he hadn't been there, I might have messed around over here, over somewhere to the west, and ended up decking it. And then here we are. It's there's an example of something else in a second, which I'll try and stop it.
Is that the wind speed on the left side of the screen? The arrow in there?
Yes. Yeah. I suppose so. I haven't noticed to see whether that changes, but we'll see if it does. Right. It's very constant. Maybe it's not. So this is the point I wanted to make. It's very brief, but we've got to the top of our climb, and actually we think we can probably glide home from there. We both started to glide. It's really worth, when you're flying in a gaggle, to spread out a bit. So, I mean, that's not a huge amount. That's probably only about 50 metres. But it's enough to sort of, you can see if somebody gets a good line or somebody gets a bad line. And you just keep in track with one another and watch. But if you're going close to each other or line astern, you miss out on that benefit. And then that's really the end of it. And we go cruising along and land. In just a minute, there's a big country house going back to bad landowners. That just round here, you do not want to land anywhere near there. He's a very nasty man. And here we are, coming down to land for lunch. And this doesn't quite tell us, and we're that little paddock just in the bottom right of that field, which we landed next to. We chickened out of landing in it, it just looked too small. So I hope that's been useful. I hope that's been informative for those of you that haven't been out doing much cross countries yet, but I'm sure you will in very short order. And I hope that sort of helped, not helped, but maybe reinforced people who have already done quite a lot of cross countries about some of the tricks and things you need to look out for. And I think I better stop now, right?
Thank you. It was a great interesting.
Thank you very much.
Hopefully we'll get a chance to watch it again with